"What about that?" said Scrubs suddenly, pointing upstream to their left. Then they all looked and saw the last thing they were expecting. A bridge. And what a bridge, too. It was a huge single arch that spanned the gorge from cliff top to cliff top. And the crown of that arch was as high above the cliff tops as the dome of St. Paul's is above the street. "Why, it must be a giant's bridge," said Jill. "Or a sorcerer's, more likely," said Puddlegum. "We've got to look out for enchantments in a place like this. I think it's a trap. I think it'll turn into mist and melt away just as we're out on the middle of it." "Oh, for goodness sakes, don't be such a wet blanket," said Scrub. "Why on earth shouldn't it be a proper bridge?" "Do you think any of the giants we've seen would have sense to build a thing like that?" said Puddlegum. "But mustn't it have been built by other giants?" said Jill. "I mean, by giants who lived hundreds of years ago and were far cleverer than the modern kind. It might have been built by the same ones who built the giant city we're looking for, and that would mean they were on the right track, the old bridge leading to the old city." "That's a real brainwave pole," said Scrub. "It must be that. Come on." So they turned and went to the bridge, and when they reached it, it certainly seemed solid enough. The single stones were as big as those at Stonehenge, and must have been squared by good masons once, though now they were cracked and crumbled. The balustrade had apparently been covered with rich carvings, of which some traces remained, mouldering faces and forms of giants, minotaurs, squids, centipedes, and dreadful gods. Puddlegum still didn't trust it, but he consented to cross it with the children. The climb to the crown of the arch was long and heavy. In many places the great stones had dropped out, leaving horrible gaps through which you could look down on the river foaming thousands of feet below. They saw an eagle flying through under their feet, and the higher they went, the colder it grew, and the wind blew so that they could hardly keep their footing. It seemed to shake the bridge. When they reached the top and could look down the farther slope of the bridge, they saw what looked like the remains of an ancient giant road stretching away from them in the heart of the mountains. Many stones of its pavement were missing, and there were the wide patches of grass between those that remained. And riding toward them on that ancient road were two people of normal grown-up human size. "Keep on, move toward them," said Puddlegum. "Anyone you meet in a place like this is likely not to be an enemy, but we mustn't let them think we're afraid." "Oh, is as likely as not to be an enemy." By the time they had stepped off the edge of the bridge onto the grass, the two strangers were quite close. One was a knight in complete armor with his visor down. His armor and his horse were black. There was no device on his shield and no banneret on his spear. The other was a lady on a white horse, a horse so lovely that you wanted to kiss its nose and give it a lump of sugar at once. But the lady, who rode side saddle and wore a long, fluttering dress of dazzling green, was lovelier still. "Good day, travelers," she cried out in a voice as sweet as the sweetest bird's song, trilling her R's delightfully. "Some of you are young pilgrims to walk this rough waste." "That as may be, ma'am," said Puddlegum, very stiffly and on his guard. "We're looking for the ruined city of the giants," said Jill. "The ruined city," said the lady. "That's a strange place to be seeking. What will you do if you find it?" "We've got to," began Jill, but Puddlegum interrupted. "Begging your pardon, ma'am, we don't know you and your friend, a silent chap, isn't he? And you don't know us, and we'd as soon not talk to strangers about our business if you don't mind. Shall we have a little rain soon, do you think?" The lady laughed, the richest, most musical laugh you can imagine. "Well, children," she said, "you have a wise, solemn old guide with you. I think none of the worse of him for keeping his own counsel, but I'll be free with mine. I have often heard the name of the giantish city ruinous, but never met anyone who could tell me the way thither. The road leads to the borough of the castle of Harfang, where dwells the gentle giants. They are mild, civil, prudent, and courteous, as those of Eatansmore are foolish, fierce, savage, and given to all beastliness. And in Harfang, you may or may not hear tidings of the city ruinous, but certainly you shall find good lodgings and merry hosts. You would be wise to winter there, or at the least to tarry certain days for your ease and refreshment. There you shall have steaming baths, soft beds, and bright hearths, and the roast of the baked and sweet and strong will be the table 4 times a day." "I say," exclaimed Scrub, "that's something like. Think of sleeping in a bed again." "Yes, and having a hot bath," said Jill. "Do you think they'll ask us to stay? We don't know them, you see." "Only tell them," answered the lady, "that she of the green kirtle salutes them by you, and has sent them 2 fair southern children for the autumn feast." "Oh, thank you ever so much," said Jill and Scrub. "But have a care," said the lady, "on whatever day you reach Harrowfang, that you come not to the door too late, for they shut their gates a few hours after noon, and it is the custom of the castle that they open to none when once they have drawn the bolt, how hard soever he knock." The children thanked her again with shining eyes, and the lady waved to them. The Marshwiggle took off his steeple hat and bowed very stiffly. Then the Silent Knight and the lady started walking their horses up the slope of the bridge with a great clatter of hoofs. "Well," said Puddlegum, "I'll give a good deal to know where she's coming from and where she's going. Not the sort you'd expect to meet in the wilds of Giantland, is she? Up to no good, I'll be bound." "Oh, rot," said Scrub. "I thought she was simply super. And think of hot meals and warm rooms. I do hope Harrowfang isn't a long way off." "Same here," said Jill. "And hadn't she a scrumptious dress? And the horse?" "All the same," said Puddlegum. "I wish we knew a bit more about her." "I was going to ask her all about herself," said Jill, "but how could we when you wouldn't tell her anything about us?" "Yes," said Scrub, and why were you so stiff and unpleasant? Didn't you like them?" "Them," said the Wiggle. "Who's them? I only saw one." "Didn't you see the knight?" asked Jill. "I saw a suit of armor," said Puddlegum. "Why didn't he speak?" "I expect he was shy," said Jill. "Or perhaps he wants to look at her and listen to her lovely voice. I'm sure I would if I was him." "I was wondering," remarked Puddlegum, "what you'd really see if you lifted up the visor of that helmet and looked inside." "Hang it all," said Scrub. "Think of the shape of the armor. What could be inside except a man?" "How about a skeleton?" asked the Marshwiggle with ghastly cheerfulness. "Or perhaps," he added after an afterthought, "nothing at all, I mean. Nothing you could see. Something invisible." "Really, Puddlegum," said Jill with a shudder, "you have the most horrible ideas." "How do you think of them all?" "Oh, bother his ideas," said Scrub. "He's always expecting the worst, and he's always wrong. Let's think about those gentle giants and go on to Harrowfang as quickly as we can. I wish I knew how far it is." And now they nearly had the first of those quarrels with Puddlegum had foretold. Not that Jill and Scrub hadn't been sparring and snapping at each other for a good deal before, but this was the first that really serious disagreement. Puddlegum didn't want them to go to Harrowfang at all. He said he didn't know what a giant's idea of being gentle might be, and that anyway, Aslan's signs had nothing about staying with giants, gentle or otherwise. The children, on the other hand, who were sick of wind and rain, and skinny fowl roasted over campfires and hard cold earth to sleep on, were absolutely dead set to visit the gentle giants. In the end, Puddlegum agreed to do so, but only on one condition. The others must give an absolute promise that, unless he gave them leave, they would not tell the gentle giants that they came from Narnia or that they were looking for Prince Rilian. And they gave him this promise and went on. After that talk with the lady, things got worse in 2 different ways. In the first place, the country was much harder. The road led through endless narrow valleys down which a cruel north wind was always blowing in their faces. There was nothing that could be used for firewood, and there were no nice little hollows to camp in. And there had been, as there had been on the moor, and the ground was all stony and made your feet sore by day and every bit of you sore by night. In the second place, whatever the lady had intended by telling them about Harrowfang, the actual effect on the children was a bad one. They could think about nothing but beds and baths and hot meals and how lovely it would be to get indoors. They never talked about Aslan or even about the lost prince now, and Jill gave up her habit of repeating the signs over to herself every night and morning. She said to herself at first that she was too tired, but she soon forgot all about it. And though you might have expected that the idea of having a good time at Harrowfang would have made them more cheerful, it really made them more sorry for themselves and more grumpy and snappy with each other and with Puddlegum. At last they came one afternoon to a place where the gorge in which they were traveling widened out and the dark fir woods rose on either side. They looked ahead and saw that they had come through the mountains. Before them lay a desolate rocky plain. Beyond it, further mountains capped with snow, but between them and those further mountains rose a low hill with a irregular, flattish top. "Look, look!" cried Jill, pointing across the plain, and there, though through the gathering dusk and beyond the flat hill, everyone saw lights. Lights, not moonlight nor fires, but a homely, cheering row of lighted windows. And you would have never been in the wild wilderness day and night for weeks. You will hardly understand how they felt. "Harrowfang!" cried Scrub and Jill in glad, excited voices. And Harrowfang, repeated Puddleglum in a doomed, gloomy voice. But he added, "Hullo, wild geese," and he had to bow off his shoulder in a second. He brought down a good fat goose. It was far too late to think of reaching Harrowfang that day, but they had a hot meal and a fire and started the night warmer than they had been for over a week. After the fire had gone out, the night grew bitterly cold, and when they woke next morning, their blankets were stiff with frost. "Never mind," said Jill, stamping her feet. "Hot baths tonight." And that is the end of chapter 6. And the next chapter is called The Hill of the Strange Trenches. I kind of expected it just to be about the city, so that's interesting.